Welcome to the Sisterhood in Politics podcast, brought to you by the Consortium for Intersectional Justice, an international expert body specializing in promoting democracy and business and human rights. My name is Chamindra Weerawardhana, and it is my pleasure to host you. My guest today is a very, very special leader, Senator Lidia Thorpe of the Senate of the Unceded Sovereign Territories known as Australia. Senator Thorpe is a Gunnai, Gunditjmara and Djab Wurrung mother, grandmother, and advocate for First Peoples. She's an independent senator for Naarm, also known as Victoria, and represents the Black Sovereign movement. She was the first Aboriginal person from Naarm to be elected to the Federal Senate of Australia. Senator Thorpe, on behalf of the Consortium for Intersectional Justice and our Board of Governors, a very warm welcome to this space. It's a great honor and tremendous privilege to host you.
Thank you very much, Chamindra, and it's an honour to be here, and thank you for the invitation. You know, I love having a good yarn with like-minded sisters, and I think the work that you all do is incredible, and we need to get the message out there.
Absolutely. And Lydia, let's start by clearly acknowledging, for the reference of our international guests, especially, and listeners and viewers, that an acknowledgement of the fact that the Commonwealth of Australia, as we know it, stands on stolen land, on unceded sovereign territories. Let's also remind ourselves of the historic crime, declaring a Black continent rich in culture, knowledge, and life as terra nullius to sustain an extractivist and genocidal colonial project, and the continuing violence and acts of genocidal intent against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the state we know as Australia. So, Lydia, your name is quite well known in Australia and elsewhere in the world. For our guests, especially international guests, would you like to tell us a bit about your background, where you grew up, and your influences, and kind of how you come to this space, how you come into politics as such?
Thank you. Well, I was born and bred in Fitzroy and Collingwood at a time where Black power was rising, not only in this country, but elsewhere, particularly in the States. And my grandmother, both my grandmothers were a part of that, and particularly my grandmother, Alma Thorpe, who set up the first Aboriginal health service. That was our political voice. It wasn't just a health service. Mm-hmm. And we had people like Muhammad Ali come along. I sat on his knee when I was a baby. And it was a connection point for Aboriginal people across the country, but also for Black people internationally. And I don't know anything else, but the fight for justice for our people, the struggle of our people, had, Gary Foley, well-known activist in this country, around me all my life. My uncle Robbie Thorpe, who continues to take politicians and criminal, war criminals to the courts in this country. He's done that all his life. So I've been raised in a very strong Black political family. I had no choice, and here I am as a senator and doing what my people and my family have been doing longer before I have been on this earth.
Oh, bless. That continuity, right? That continuity is very important because, as feminist theorists often remind us, especially in the Black feminist tradition of Turtle Island, where they say that, the fruit of what we do today, we may not live to see that fruit in our lifetimes, but we have to prepare the next generation, to continue the good fight. So, Lydia, coming to the next question. So, for anybody who Googles the name Lydia Thorpe, the first results that come would be Sky News Australia, for example, right? And these people, they have an absolute obsession with you. And and it's interesting how the Australian media in general talks about you, the language they use when referring to you. And they often describe you as a troublemaker, as someone who is, within inverted commas, a radical, as a legislator who has little respect for the system. So they're very obsessed about respect. You have to respect the colonial system that exploited your ancestors, and you have to be grateful for that opportunity. You have to sit on one of those red benches in the Senate and so on. And then recently I watched this show where a white settler TV presenter calls you a political aborigine. Now that's if one day a biography of Lydia Thorpe were to be written, that should be the title, the political aborigine. And to a younger woman from an Indigenous background, in any part of the Commonwealth or elsewhere, for that matter, what would be your advice when it comes to facing such malicious media behavior? Because, I mean, to someone who is new to politics, it can easily get under your skin, right? This kind of constant hatred and unpreparedness to kind of take stock of where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, it's the violence of the colony, and the violence of the colony comes in all different disguises, if you like. And we know that the right-wing media are one of those strategies that the colonizers use to demonize anyone who speaks up for justice, anyone who is not white, and who is a woman that calls out truth and justice in this country. Well, that's a target right there. So what helps me is, I still have my great grandmother's words in my mind and in my heart and my soul, and that is, never forget where you come from, never forget the struggle of your people. And when I'm attacked constantly, and death threats and all of the stuff that goes along with that, I think about how hard my people have got it every day trying to survive, and the racism that people face in this country is real, it's violent, and I have to continue to call it out. And yes, I bait the racists. I play with them like a cat with a mouse, I'm going to say this because I know that that's going to really get into the heart and soul of the racists. They're not going to like that. But too bad, I'm here. I'm black and I'm proud and I'm loud. And I have a responsibility to my old people and my ancestors, and people who are struggling to put food on the table, who are struggling to get a job because of the colour of their skin, or a house, or any kind of say at any table in this country. So that's why I do it. That's how I do it. But I also make sure that I self-care so that I don't burn out. There are times where I feel like, the whole world hates me and I'm feeling a little bit isolated. But that doesn't last. It's like, you go along a smooth road and you might, have some good moments of justice, but sometimes you do dip, and that's when you need strong black women around you and women of colour who pick you up and say, come on, sis, no, you're right. And yeah, I just keep going, and I go back to country. I'm reminded by my country that we need to continue to protect, and that's that's what nourishes me, is my mother country. So maintain that connection and never forget your people's struggle.
And Lydia, for our international viewers and listeners, in the Indigenous territories we know as Australia, when you say I go back to country, it means the territory you come from, right? The sovereign lands you come from.
That's correct, and that's in southeast Victoria. Beautiful country, and we have a place called Garryword, which is a place where I pray. I connect with my ancestors, and I talk
Right.
to my ancestors and gain strength from that.
Oh, bless. Because it's a very special moment for me as a Sri Lankan woman to have this conversation with you, because that country you mentioned, your native land, is also the adoptive home to many of my people. So there are strong ties of kinship, and some of them are very conscious of the importance of the struggles for justice for the Indigenous people on the land. Some of them maybe not, unfortunately, because that is what colonization does. Because I also come from a very deeply colonized nation with a lot of colonial hangovers in our heads. So, and that brings me to my next question, Lydia. So this was on the news all over the place just in the last couple of days. You went to Meeanjin, University of Technology, and you gave a talk, and where you say that you have to fly the red, yellow, black flag, and stand up and make a very clear statement. So can you share with us briefly about the content of that speech, and what are your thoughts about, I mean, it's unbelievable how scared people are. It has really rattled the establishment. And one guy says on the news that they should cut funding to the Queensland University of Technology because you're brainwashing the younger generation, basically brainwashing, right? So terra nullius is not brainwashing, and all these centuries long hatred against the rightful owners of the land is not brainwashing. It's one Indigenous woman proudly, head on her shoulders, standing up and saying that we need to fly our flag, is when they get really worked up. So can you share a few words about that? And also, before I give you the floor, shout out to Professor Chelsea Watego, my colleague in the O'Neill Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination and Global Health. So we sit together in the commission, and I had the great pleasure last year of having a conversation on decolonial feminism with Chelsea as well. So shout out to Chelsea, and over to you, Lydia.
Absolutely, and double shout out because Chelsea also wrote the book Another Day in the Colony, and I
Right.
urge people to look at that book
100%.
because
Yeah.
it's incredible, and it's it's my day most days in the colonial headquarters in Canberra. So that speech was to a closed room. There were no media allowed. There was no one else allowed to be in that room, and it was a safe space. So I said what I said, which is what I've always said: pay the rent. You're on stolen land. Basically, it's time to take it back. Put our flags up and start asserting sovereignty. Start practicing what sovereignty
Right.
is, and that is just take it back. I mean, they just rocked up and stole our land and caused havoc and mass destruction. We're not going to be violent. We're not a violent people, but we want our land back. We're sick of governments after governments making promises and not delivering on justice for our people. So as long as we have the rates of incarceration that we do, deaths in custody, child removals at 24,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, we have to make a stand. We can't just sit on the fence and watch this happen and allow the continued destruction of water and land and governments continuing to sell off Crown land while there's conversations about treaties happening. Crown land is our land. We're not about taking people's backyards, so Pauline Hanson's backyard will be safe for now.
For now.
But, I've always reminded her that she's got to start paying the rent. I also let Clive Palmer know that he needs to pay the rent. All these white people that are complicit of stealing the wealth of my people and destroying our land to do that,
Right.
they need to pay the rent for being on stolen land.
100%.
Otherwise, they should leave.
Otherwise, they should like exactly. And like you said earlier, the challenges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people face in what we know as Australia, it's a very justifiable claim to make. So, and the fact that it rattles them so much is evidence that they know that something is wrong. They know how bad it is, and they know the extent to which they benefit from this system. And that seems to be the reason why they are so scared, because why would they take issue with a closed door event that took place in Eastern Australia? So, I mean, this is the reality, the
It
truth of
was
the matter.
pretty funny when it hit the newspapers. My staff and I just laughed because it we didn't expect the response, and
Hmm.
the fear, the clutching the pearl moment, because white people are worried about having things taken from them. That's their worst
Right.
fear
Yes.
because they're guilty
100%.
of that themselves.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So,
Hmm.
Lydia, on that note, let's talk about your time in the Senate so far. So, in your view, what are the most important contributions to policymaking, lawmaking that you have made so far in terms of legislative innovations? And what are the most intransigent, if not the most difficult issues to kind of raise in that settler government space?
Hmm. Well, I've been balance of power for a number of um, pieces of legislation. Um, Probably too many to mention. But there's, workplace, like workers' rights. I was in balance of power for that piece of legislation. I've been involved in water legislation and guaranteed um, money for resources for Aboriginal people along the Murray-Darling. $40 million I got in resources for that consortium, and a small portion of water rights, which we have to continue to fight for. I've introduced a number of private senators' bills. I introduced the Declaration of, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Right.
That was voted down by both Labor and Liberal. And due to, colonisation and assimilation, we had Aboriginal people in
100%.
the Labor Party voting down their own
Mm-hmm.
rights, which was quite disturbing. I've introduced I introduced a genocide bill to remove the power of the Attorney General on deciding who can take a case of genocide to any court in this country. It's called the AG's Fiat, and
Mm-hmm.
colonisers use this as a way of getting away with genocide. So in this country, we cannot hear in any courts a genocide case. Not the genocide in Palestine, not the genocide here, not the genocide anywhere. It's up to one person, and that person is Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General of this country, and that should not be the case. It should not be up to one white man to make a decision on whether genocide can be heard in this country. So that again was voted down by the Labor and the Liberal parties. I've worked on a number of other initiatives. I mean, how long is a piece of string? I have been there for a while now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's it's great to have influence into making legislation a bit better. Um,
Absolutely.
but
Mhm.
with only a certain amount on the progressive people on the crossbench, you can only do so much to make whatever government better,
Exactly.
or bad legislation a little bit not so bad.
Hmm.
But it is difficult being in that space and obeying the colonial
Right.
law, which does not um, sit with me, obviously, as a sovereign Black woman. It's a law that was enforced upon us. And there's so many old rules that just don't apply today. So we need to,
Right.
update the rules, get it up to date. It doesn't, you look at Jordan Steele John, he's in a wheelchair, he's a beautiful man with a disability. The Parliament doesn't cater for people with disabilities. They put a ramp in, single ramp, very steep ramp to get him to the floor, but it's dangerous. Like, they just do not care
Right.
if you are not white and not like them. If
Like
you're
them.
not like
Exactly.
them, then you don't fit in and you're going to find it difficult. But we have to
Right.
use their own tactics against them, and that's something that I've been able to learn over the years.
Grand. So, Lydia, we'll come to this lawmaking part a bit later in our conversation. So, you just said something very interesting. When you don't look like them, how difficult it is. So, I'll come to this incident involving Senator Payman. Where when Senator Payman was very badly attacked, you stood up in support of Senator Payman. And then what happened was, I say this as a very precious occasion when you stood with your colleague, a woman who represents, I would say, intersections of lived experience that are different from yours, right? And then with a sense of solidarity and most importantly, sisterhood, you stood with Senator Payman. And our podcast is named Sisterhood in Politics. So can you walk us through what happened there? And especially for international viewers and listeners, and share your thoughts on that whole episode and what can we say about this. I'll borrow from Theo Maori. Maori people call the government space the Kavanatanga space, so the crown space as such. So in this Kavanatanga space, the Senate didn't waste any time to put the whole blame on you, right? What is this obsession to always see the Indigenous woman as the problem?
Because I am their problem. I'm holding up a mirror and I'm saying, look at yourselves. This is a disgusting, violent, racist place that does not respect anyone that doesn't look like them. But also we have to remember that Parliament House in Canberra is built on a gathering place of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. So this monstrosity of a building has, they've displaced the people from that land, and that was a beautiful gathering place, and they've put this building on top with all these white laws, with all these white men, and they are scared of people like me. Any woman of colour that stands up against the status quo is seen to be a threat. So in terms of Senator Payman, I wasn't aware of what was going on. It was alerted to me by my staff, so I ran to the chamber because I'd heard that Pauline Hanson was having a go at Senator Payman. So I went to the chamber. I hadn't seen the document that Pauline had put towards the Senate, which was questioning Senator Payman's legitimacy of being a politician in that place, Section 44 of the Constitution. And I was given the paper. I sat there reading it whilst I was listening to Senator Payman, and I could feel her heart. I could feel her anger. And she's like my little sister, much younger than me. I'm 51. I'm a grandmother, and I wouldn't allow anybody to be subjected to that on the street or anywhere. And when I read that, I was infuriated by what I'd written and hearing the cries of my sister justifying her existence when she, I just simply ripped up the paper and and threw it into Pauline Hanson's direction. And yeah, I got suspended for that.
Oh, bless.
So what do you do? I mean, I got suspended from Parliament, but Pauline Hanson can walk into the Parliament with a burqa,
Right.
and no consequence. So there's one rule for the white people, and then there's all these other rules for the black people, and that's how the colonial project has been designed, because it was
100%.
designed by old white men.
All white men. And also, Lydia, let's also at this point here, because about this your Meeanjin talk in the media coverage, they also mention an interesting term. They refer to your advocacy for the rights of your people as identity politics, and I think that's extremely disrespectful, because identity politics have got nothing to do with the advocacy of an indigenous woman, representing a colonized, exploited people who stands for her rights. Right, and this is something that we really, really, really need to reiterate. And so that brings me to my next question. Let's spend a minute on what you had to say to King Charles when he visited recently. And so we have seen the extent to which the Australian media took issue with you after this. They featured other Indigenous people, especially Indigenous women, who took issue with you, who didn't agree with what you had to say, who were hell-bent on saying that you were disrespectful to the British sovereign and all of that. And so how did you feel in that room? I mean, this is what I meant to ask. Did you feel nervous, or did you feel that your ancestors were, who had boldly stood against Charles's predecessors, were with you in that room? Or how did you feel it in your body when you decided to make that statement? Because it's such a formal space, and a space of power, and it takes
It
a lot
was
of courage
easy.
to stand up. It
It
was
was
easy.
easy. I don't see that place as a place of power. I don't
Mhm,
see crusty old men sitting in a crusty old chair as power. I don't
mhm,
see it. I see somebody who's got a job, who can change things.
mhm,
It was just going to a meeting with a couple of old white fellas, and one wasn't giving me an opportunity to meet with them personally because maybe I'm not good enough. And I'd sent a number of letters to the colonising king. No response. I was to hand him a writ from my uncle for him
mhm,
to appear in the International Court of Justice on genocide and crimes against humanity when it come to our people. That was my plan. I had it. That's the piece of paper I had in my hand. Now, he was meant to come walking past us, but because they saw me with my back to the anthem and preparing myself to do something, which I didn't know what I was going to do at that point, they actually brought him in the back door, and he didn't get to walk past anybody. So,
right.
boo-hoo. So they brought him through the back door, and then they put him on his crusty old seat. And I was not nervous. I was there in my possum skin cloak, which I have behind me,
Right.
and I felt empowered. I know my ancestors were there. I felt empowered. For me not to feel scared or nervous, I knew that there was a higher power, and that was my old people. The only nervousness that I had was not being clear in whatever I was going to say and
Mhm,
stuffing it up. Like, okay, I'm just going to, like, ancestors saying, get out there and say something. So I went out, and I'm like, And then all these words just came out. I didn't think. I just looked at this man and it came out. And when I look back at that, I just think, wow, yeah, I'm glad I said those things. And then I got carried out at the end by the police, and that's when I did swear. I didn't want to swear, but being carried out by the police, I ended up saying F the colony 3 times, which I still stand by, because it's the violence that continues and the ignorance of it happening, and how, you know, they could just laugh it off. So I was happy to bring it to the world's attention, the plight of my
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely, and it was a very, very, very strategic move, Lydia. It's very good that you did what you did, and it's very good that you said what you said. And so, on that note, what can we say about Indigenous leaders? People who have held, even people who have held ministerial portfolios that concern Indigenous affairs, react to your statement to in front of the king, and I quote, that there is respect that has to be given as we expect respect to be given to us. I mean, Lydia, don't these people, I mean, are they suffering some form of historical amnesia?
They're
Don't they have
assimilated. They've
assimilated?
assimilated. And, you know, we're talking about the same people that allow the destruction of their own land and water. We're talking
Mhm.
about, if you're talking about people like the Minister for Indigenous Australians, her own water and land is being destroyed by a big mining company, and she
Right.
doesn't care. If she cared, she would stop it. So when Aboriginal people are in positions like this that allow the destruction of their own land while their own families and community are crying for it to stop, where we have sacred sites being destroyed, uh, I don't know how these people sleep at night. I don't know how a minister who is responsible for, well, is meant to be responsible for our health and well-being in this country, denies justice of our people, continues to allow deaths in custody, child removals, all of those things. When they come at me, it's water off a duck's back, because if you want to talk about respect, then stop bowing and kneeling to the white man, who is your boss, by the
Correct.
way. Your boss is Anthony Albanese, who's a old white man. You are kneeling to him to destroy us. Well, that's called a native police, assimilated. And back in the old days when we were under attack and being colonised, they used to pick off Aboriginal people to track Aboriginal people down.
Hmm.
And today it's more sophisticated, and they call them ministers now.
Right. Very, very good way of putting it. Very accurate. So that brings me to my next question, Lydia. So, I mean, this colonial establishment, right? It has this way of assimilating indigenous people into that system and considering indigenous people as an addendum, not as sovereign nations in themselves, right? Bodies of rights where you have the crown space and the indigenous space, not in that way, but as a minor addendum. So,
Mm.
73 to 76, National Aboriginal Consultative Committee; 77 to 85, National Aboriginal Congress; then thereafter, in the years that followed, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, National Indigenous Council, National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council, and the list goes on.
Mm.
And this brings me to a question about, your decision to quit the Australian Green Party, Indigenous voice to Parliament, for the reference of our international guests and viewers. would you be able to share what Indigenous voice to Parliament exactly means, and your disagreement, the key points of your disagreements with those policies?
Yes, absolutely. So the voice to Parliament was a front for a more sinister objective to get us into their colonial constitution. It
Mm-hmm.
was not about a voice to Parliament. It was about constitutional recognition, putting us in there and making us nice little neat Indigenous Australians under
Right.
their law. We have the oldest law on the planet. Our constitution is in our water, our land, our totems. It's not part of the colonial constitution. We don't need
Exactly.
the whole country to decide what is best for us. And what they were proposing was an advisory body with no power, that the two old white men, which the leader of this country, the so-called Prime Minister, and the opposition leader, were to make up the rules for that advisory body. So then you got two old white men deciding what this advisory body can and can't do. That was the voice to Parliament. What an absolute insult and joke that they put that on us in this country. Have a vote about us when it wasn't time. The country's too racist to go to a vote on us. We need truth-telling first. We need to educate this country that Captain Cook did not discover it, that we've been here since the beginning of time, and we don't want to be part of your constitution. If you want to give us some power or a voice,
Right.
give us dedicated seats in the federal parliament.
Exactly.
Give us 7 to 10 Senate seats. Let us be the balance of power as black sovereigns.
100%.
So they weren't going to entertain that, and people got sucked in by, all of the language, statement from the heart, Uluru. The meeting did not happen at Uluru. The meeting happened at a place called Yalara. And there were protests way back then, which I was also a part of, that said, no, we don't want constitutional recognition. We want to go down the path of a treaty because we want peace. We are sick of being at war in this country. Sickest people on our own land, poorest people on our own land. The effects of genocide is still so real for us.
Exactly.
And, causing harm to a race of people, that still happens. Taking children away and putting them with someone else, that still happens. They are acts of genocide.
100%. 100%. So, Lydia, this brings me to my next question. We are going to an interesting territory here. So, like I said earlier, in Te Ao Maori, in the Maori world, the Crown government space is described as the Kawanatanga space. And what Maori leaders are asking for today, especially Te Pāti Maori o Aotearoa, the Maori party, what they're asking for is they're calling for what they call a Treaty-Centric Aotearoa based on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, not the Treaty of Waitangi, not the English version, but the Te Reo Maori version of the treaty, where the Maori leaders agreed to share the land and never ever cede their sovereignty. The Rangatira Maori, the Maori leaders, did not agree to cede their sovereignty to the British Crown. So that is why, hence, the colonial establishment's fear of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So this call for a Tiriti-centric Aotearoa is very strong in neighboring Aotearoa. And so what this Tiriti-centric Aotearoa means is a partnership, an equal partnership, and that is precisely what you just mentioned as well. So you have mentioned repeatedly the necessity of a treaty, and you mentioned that in front of King Charles as well, right? We need a treaty. And could you briefly explain the key parameters in your opinion of such a treaty? Like if such a
Mm.
treaty were to be implemented, what would it look like in practice?
Well, that's something that uh, my people right across this country, we have, 300 different languages across this country. We have countries within countries. So those language groups and those tribes and clans, they need to self-determine what treaty looks like for them.
Mm-hmm.
Me as one person, as a Gunnai, Gunditjmara and Djab Wurrung woman, can't say what everyone else wants. But what I can say is that treaty should be about peace. That's the treaty I want. That's the treaty my old people want. We want peace. We want land back. We want reparations. We want the end to the destruction of our land. We want to be economically independent and self-sufficient on our own land.
Mm-hmm.
And treaty has to be between sovereigns. It can't be an administrative process like we're seeing in some parts of this country where it's been dictated to from the outset from government about what we can negotiate and what we can't negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a treaty.
That's not a treaty.
So it's got to be about peace and it's got to be about justice. And I think we need to update the Constitution and make it more just and equal and fair. We need a human rights led bill in this country, and we need to become a republic. We need to get rid of the colonizing king,
Mm-hmm.
but we need a treaty first because we need to enshrine and ensure that treaty principles are part of the new fabric of this ancient land that we're on. And those principles have to include the wisdom and knowledge of the ancient land so that they can be protected for forevermore.
Exactly, including Indigenous legal orders and also the rightful representation of Indigenous peoples of these territories in all their diversity, right? And
Absolutely.
Lydia, that's a great point, because I really needed to ask you that question, because um, it looks like there are a lot of Indigenous people who seem to find it hard to kind of imagine what a treaty-centric Australia or a treaty-centric country as such, or countries in the plural, on what we know as Australia would look like.
Mm.
So I think this is where there's a lack of imagination. Ruha Benjamin, who is an African American studies professor at Princeton University, recently wrote a whole book called Imagination, a manifesto, where she encourages people to think, like, reimagine our worlds, reimagine better worlds where we can, live better lives. So I think this conversation about a treaty, this conversation about better representation, equal partnerships, respect for Indigenous legal orders, and so on, I think it's a very important conversation. That and I think we are all across the Commonwealth, everywhere, we are all grateful to you for raising this point, because what you're raising concerns our countries as well, because where
Mm.
I come from, again, we have Roman Dutch law, but what about our Indigenous legal orders that the British outlawed, right? So there is comparative relevance to many other parts of the world in what you're saying. So Lydia, we are coming towards the end of our conversation. So your views on the Palestinian question are quite well known, right? You have been a regular presence in the federal capital and also in your home territory of Naarm, when there have been major social mobilization, major protest campaigns in relation to Palestine. And let's talk about indigenous governance beyond the Kamanatanga space as such, beyond the crown space. So throughout, our conversation from the beginning onwards, you were sharing with me how challenging it is, right, as an indigenous woman to stand your ground in this Kamanatanga space, because it's not meant for an indigenous woman, right? It's meant for this very white, very upper class settler men in
Mm.
black suits, and a minority of white women who come from similar backgrounds, and it is their space actually. So what
Mm.
if we were to think beyond that Kavanatanga space, and if that treaty were to come into place, right? If indigenous people in what we know as Australia were to have a say in determining foreign policy and the international affairs of the country, if that were to be the case, um, if you had responsibility on foreign policy, as an indigenous woman, if you had responsibility on foreign policy, what would be your approach to the Palestinian question and to other global challenges such as, climate injustices, gender-based violence, and so on? How would you, approach these things?
Well, I certainly wouldn't allow my government to be complicit in genocide. So I would stop the parts to the ammunition that comes out of this country and goes straight to Israel. I would stop that immediately, which I've been questioning in Parliament of recent. Also have another private senator's bill to stop that from happening. So any arms, anything that is contributing to a genocide anywhere in the world, I would condemn that into on a global stage, but also I would not allow this country to support that. And I would be very vocal with First Peoples of those lands that are standing up against those atrocities and those genocides. I would stand with them on an international stage, including climate, and call for solidarity, because it's First Peoples around the world that have the knowledge on how to deal with the climate issue that colonization brought to us. We have the answers. We have the knowledge. We know how to look after the land, the water, the sky, the birds, everything. It's in our blood. It's in our birthright. So we would take over the world, basically, with the international solidarity of First Peoples, and show the rest of the world how it should be done and how it can be done. And I think we'd be in a much better place. But I can't see myself being a minister in any government in the time that I have left. But hopefully, one of my grandkids can do that.
Mm-hmm. Hence the importance of continuing this conversation of a treaty, Lydia, because a treaty-centric country would be something that is tremendous to the people in the country and also abroad, because in many indigenous nations, people are talking about treaties, people are talking about similar legislative innovations. And we'll also live in the age of fascism, right? I mean, my next book, I call it Feminism in the Age of Fascism, because these fascist movements are on the rise everywhere. And what they're trying to do is to maintain control, right? Maintain control of, what Dr. Bell Hooks used to call the imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy. So, I mean, the pangs of the white supremacist patriarchy are what you get to experience in the Australian Senate. Same with Senator Payman. So, This is where that kind of discourse, the political philosophy that you have injected to the Australian political space, I believe is extremely important. And I'm sure you've inspired a younger generation of Indigenous leaders within Australia and beyond to, to take that mantle forward, to take that dialogue, to take that political philosophy forward, that there is a clear need for a treaty, and that this existing way of considering Indigenous people as an addendum to policy, as a minor matter. The establishment will always figure out ways of justifying their actions, right? The confiscation of land, the violence against children and babies in the Indigenous communities. So this is where there is a very clear need for a treaty. So, and more power to you, Lydia, to continue that fight. And we should all unconditionally stand with you, and we will always do. And on that note, Senator Thorpe, it's a great pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for joining us today. And on a final note, I would say, may you keep inspiring many younger women from all backgrounds everywhere, especially in Indigenous communities, to make a difference in public life, and more power to you.
Thank you very much, Chamindra. And it's been a deadly yarn. I wish we could yarn a lot longer. And
Absolutely.
I do encourage more Black and brown women, young women particularly, don't be afraid. Don't be shame. We say shame. That's, don't be embarrassed. We've got to do this. This is our responsibility. Right. And we're born tough. We're born strong.
Absolutely.
And we all come from good blood. So, I'll support more Black and brown women any day going into this space, and reach out if you want to do that.
Oh, bless.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's a great note to end a podcast named Sisterhood in Politics. Thank you very much, Lydia.